Coming up on 744, welcome back. President Trump is continuing his push to acquire Greenland, most recently over the weekend, threatening tariffs on European allies who oppose his plan.
He also sent a text message to Norway's prime minister saying that he no longer felt an obligation to think purely of peace in regards to taking control of the territory. His reasoning is that America needs that territory for national defense.
All right, to help break this down, we need a brief history in the U.S. involvement in Greenland. After World War II, there was an agreement. Then we get NATO and the 1951 Defensive Greenland Agreement, which gives the U.S. the right to operate and maintain military bases in Greenland as part of NATO's collective defense. That agreement was then amended in 2004, adding a requirement that the U.S. consult with Denmark and Greenland before making major changes to its military operations there. So that begs a question. Why does the United States need to acquire Greenland given the agreements in place? Senior advisor with the Center for Strategic and International Studies and retired Marine Colonel Mark Kansian joining us to help answer that question. Colonel, good morning. Do you think those 2004 consultation requirements are part of what's driving the push to acquire Greenland, since ownership would remove that need for that extra layer of approval?
I don't think so. The president has not mentioned that as a particular stumbling block. He talks about wanting to have possession of Greenland, saying he likes to have actual ownership of territory. The 2004 agreement really just required consultation. Didn't say the United States had to get Danish approval, just that we would consult with them, particularly if we were going to change any of the current military operations. The United States has broad authorities to conduct military operations under the 1951 agreement. There's almost nothing that you can think of that the United States would want to do that the Danes would not agree to.
Colonel, Europe is one of the U.S.'s major allies for more than 70 years. What is the tension that's now being created? What does that do to this historic friendship between our allies and what's going on with Greenland?
Well, it's creating tremendous tension. The Trump administration has not ruled out military force. The idea of state using military force against a NATO ally like Denmark is really unthinkable. The Europeans have been thinking about how they would respond to that. And then, of course, there's the economic coercion. It's fractured or damaged the alliance. And there were many in the administration who don't regard that as a bad thing, that are very skeptical about Europe and NATO. But I think that many observers believe this is a bad thing, because NATO and our connection with Europe has stood us so well for so many decades.
Colonel, we know that the president has said that the U.S. needs to take over the territory of Greenland because it has failed to protect against foreign threats. What exactly are those foreign threats that he's talking about, and what would an increased military presence actually do to benefit the U.S.?
Well, the president has talked about China and Russia. He said that Greenland can't defend against them, and that's true, but Greenland's part of NATO. NATO can certainly defend against those threats. The threat from Russia and the Soviet Union before it has been a long-standing threat. That's why the United States established a military presence in the Cold War. China, of course, has been reaching out with economic agreements, but anything they do on Greenland would have to be approved by the Danish government, could not be done unilaterally. So NATO can defend Greenland against any Russian or Chinese encroachments.
Colonel, that kind of leads me back to part of the first question there. Militarily, looking at Greenland, what would change with ownership? Because it seems from what you're saying that anything that we would want to do militarily to protect against an attack from Russia or China, we can do already. So then what is the push militarily wise, looking at it from a strategic point of view?
Well, it's hard to think about what advantage we might get from actual ownership. Right now, we have a base on the west coast, Patufic. We might want to expand that, although the Danes have indicated they'd be willing to do that. During the Cold War, remember, we had over 10,000 troops there. Now we have something like 150. And if we wanted to expand our presence at Patufic, we could under the agreement. So it's not clear what we would really gain, except the headache of now having to govern this isolated island, which is actually not very prosperous. It requires continuing subsidies, and we have to deal with the Greenland people and their home rule, we'd get a lot of headaches, and I don't think much benefit.
Quickly, Colonel, before we run out of time, over the years, over the decades, NATO has given Washington political influence all across Europe. You just mentioned a network of bases that we have scattered throughout the region, and that in return, Europe has provided defense departments, here in the U.S., lots of money being, for customers to arm them. Could this push from the United States threaten some of those even transactions when it comes to the Defense Department in arming Europe in the future?
It does. There's two risks here. One is about U.S. Arms sales, which to Europe and around the world have been very substantial. And that's important to President Trump. He sees that as part of his effort to increase manufacturing. If the Europeans started to think that the United States was not a reliable supplier, that we might cut them off, then they might look elsewhere for arms. Plus, we have this network of bases that we can use when we need to. We've seen some of those being used in the Middle East. It gives us a lot of flexibility, and the future's uncertain. You never know when you're going to need to use a base. Having access to them is very advantageous to the United States.
All right, obviously, the conversations of this ramping up. We're not going to be done with it anytime soon. Retired Marine Colonel Mark Hansen, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.